help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Nun. We are in middle of the Machloikes Amoyroyim, Rab Chanina Reish Lakish, Rab Amir Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, whether if after the Kohen Gadol already shechted the par, this is independent of whether he already did the chafina or not. Just focus on the par. He shechted the par. The blood was gathered, the Kohen Gadol, if he passes away now, so you have a backup Kohen Gadol that's going to continue with the Avodah. The Torah says, Bezois Yavei Aharon El HaKodesh Bepar Ben Bakar Lechatos. Does the new Kohen Gadol have to bring his own par? Or do we say, since the dam of the original Kohen Gadol's par is Be'en, it becomes his, and when he brings it in, he's bringing in the par. Because maybe you can understand or you can view the blood of the par, as the bull itself. That's the Machloikas Amoyroim. We're going to continue with this. We're going to ask a klotz kasha on this whole Machloikas. We have a rule specifically by chatos. If you remember that actually there are chamisha chatois, there are 5 karbanos, 5 scenarios where if the chatos dies, or if the chatos, the owner passes away, or other reasons why the carbon as it is cannot be brought, we don't say, do what we normally say by the other karbanos, even after they are imbued with kedusha saguf, that yiru ache yista'avu, and then we sell them. No, we say that they have to be left to die. Chatois hamesois. So l'chayra, Danny, since this pod was bought out of pocket from the Kohen Gadol, and now the Kohen Gadol passes away, isn't this not one of the 5 cases, chatos shemesu be'oleo, that the chatos has to be left to die? What's even the machloikis? Oh, so the whole daf is going to be to point out that it's not so simple to categorize this chatos as a korban yachid, even though we're going to go back and forth and there's different tanoim and how to understand pshat in the braisas. But we have to also know that by the very fact that the Kohen Gadol does the vidui sheni, not only for himself but for the other kohanim, minimally, l'cha'ura, this is called a chatos that belongs to partners. Now, does that resolve the inquiry? Yes, as we'll see, it will. Because the only time when we have the halacha l'moshe misinai that a chatos is left to die, if it's a chatos yachid, and not if it's a tzibur, and not even if it's a chatos that belongs to partners. Now we're going to go, because of this, we're going to chazer over this general question: when do we say that certain karbanos are doiche Shabbos and doiche Tuma? When are they not doiche Shabbos and Tuma? Is it simply because Yachid versus Rabim? Or is it, as we'll learn later, not connected to Yachid and Rabim? All linked to this question of how to classify this par. Is it a Yachid? Is it a Tzibur? Is it a Shutfis? We're going to learn, because of it, on Daf Nun Amud Beis, laws of Temura. One of the rules of Temura is that you can only effect Temura from a Karban Yachid. And how it's going to link into the Par Ben Bakar. Not that we'll speak about Temura when we learn the Daf. No one is saying that you should make a Temura. We're not allowed to make a substitution, but if you made a substitution, then many times it's effective. But there are restrictions to Temura, and we're going to bring back in the question of whether you can make a Temura from this Par. All how to better understand the classification of this Par and much more. Chavre, we left off 11 lines from the top of the Amid. Again, we are now going back to this machloikis, whether the new Kohen Gadol could just simply take up where the original Kohen Gadol left off from, or whether he has to shech the new Par. And that question is, how do you teach the word bezois yavei aran bepar? If bepar also means bidamay shel par, well, the new Kohen Gadol is following all the steps. He's coming in with the dam of the par. Frek the Gemara, I don't understand. Even if the dam of the par could be called par, so this verse is being fulfilled, but anyways, it's a problem. What's the problem? This is one of the 5 chatois hamesos, right? The remes, the mnemonic to remember is v'timna. One of them is chatos shemesos ba'aleh, and the rule is v'chatos shemesos ba'aleh lemisa azla. Of course, the new Kohen Gadol has to buy a new par. The original par and the dam is completely invalidated. The par is bought from the money of the Kohen Gadol. Amar lei Ravin bar Ada to Rava, that I want you to know that Amri Talmidach, you Rava, your students, they quote in the name of Rav Amram that the reason why this is a non-issue because chatos tziburi. We don't classify the par as a private carbon, even though it comes out of the packet of the Kohen Gadol. So what? He gives it over to the community, right? He makes a vidui sheni. Now, community doesn't mean for all of the Bnei Yisrael, but for his brethren Kohanim. We'll see soon whether that's called tzibur, whether that's called shutfis. That's a nuance we'll get to in a moment. But it's not privately owned. When do we have Allah Moshe Misinai that are 5 scenarios where a chatas has to be left to die? That's only by a chatas that belongs to a yachid. And since it's a tzibur, v'lo ilam yisa asla. Now, Rav Amram is not siding with this question. All he's saying is that there is room for a machloikas. Because here the question now will be, par it means dam, or par means no, the whole bull, not only the dam. Fine. But don't frag up, don't slug up the whole premise of there is room because it's chatos tzibur. Now, Rav Amram attempted to bring a proof that we classify this par as a chatos tzibur, at least according to some Tanoim, and Rava will reject the proof. But as we'll see, Rava doesn't reject the response. He doesn't like the way Rav Amram said that it's called a tzibur. Now, what was Rav Amram's attempted proof? Because it says whether it's a Mishnah, whether this is a Braisa, that here obviously we're beginning in middle. The Tanach is trying to explain why is it that certain karbanos are brought even on Shabbos and certain karbanos are not. Certain karbanos are brought even if there is tumah. Certain karbanos are not. So the Tanach worded it simply, Yachid, not doiche Shabbos, not doiche Tumah. Tzibur, doiche Shabbos, doiche Tumah. So to that, Omar Loi, Rabbi Meir, Rav Meir tells this Tanach, no, that's not the correct approach. I'll refute it. V'haraya, v'haloi par Yoma Kippurim, these are the words of Rabbi Meir, as well as the daily Chaviti Kohen Gadol, as well as a Korban Pesach. Now clearly, guys, Rav Meir is saying that it's called a Korban Yachid, which won't be the end of the world because, like we mentioned, Rav Amram classifying it as a tzibur is according to some Tanoim, which is fine. That it's a Korban Yachid, yet we know regarding all these three that it's Doichas HaShabbos. I mean, just think about it. Yom HaKippur itself is Shabbos Shabbosin. The Kohen Gadol brings his chavitim, which is divided in half every single day. Korban Pesach, we learned Masechtas Pesachim is brought whenever Yudalad is, whenever it is. If Yudalad is on Erev on Shabbos, it's brought on Shabbos. Yet it's doicha both Shabbos and Tumah. So don't tell me that it's simple Yachid and Tzibur, Nishtamis. End of quote. So now says Rav Amram, okay, Rav Meir is saying that it's a Korban Yachid. So Lav Mechlal, what about the Tanach? Does that not prove that the Tanach doesn't agree with that? Now we're going to only focus on the part of Yom Kippur, that the Tanach holds that it's called a Korban Tzibur. So at least, le Tanach, I responded the big bombe question, it's called a Korban Tzibur. Says Rava to his Talmidim, what Rav Amram brought from this Mishnah is not a proof. Not a proof doesn't mean he disagrees with the answer, but he disagrees with the detail of the answer. Let's go weiter. Whether it's a Mishnah or a Braisa. The Mishnah and the Braisa are very similar, and you have to know the Girsa here in the Gemara to know whether we're quoting from the Mishnah or from the Braisa. Tiktani, it says weiter, another challenge to the Tanach, who said simply, Yachid Tzibur. Now from Rabbi Yaakov, from the Tana Rabbi Yaakov, that Omar Loi says to the Tanach, who? Rabbi Yaakov, V'haloi par helam davar shel Tzibur. As we keep on learning already many times, right, when the Sanhedrin made a mistake in a detail of a sin for which you chayiv kares b'mezid, and they said you are allowed to do that. Certain type of chaylev may be eaten, and then the roiv hakol ate it, so there is a par. Or if the similar mistake was made specifically regarding a detailed avodah zara service, which may not be done, but they erroneously said it may be done, for which you have to bring. The community, the Sanhedrin has to bring a he-goat and chagiga. Wow. Every Jew has to bring a chagiga during every one of the 3 Yomim Tovim. that Rabbi Yaakov considers these three carbon tzibur. Chevra, tomorrow, Daf Nun Aleph, the first two are clear. It's a tzibur. Why is Chagiga called a carbon tzibur? We'll see that, God willing, tomorrow. It's not negir right now. And nevertheless, these three, ve'enam doichim, not Shabbos, not Tuma. So again, this is just, you don't tell me Yochid and Tzibur. No. And says Rava now, if you learned correct pshat, that when Rav Meir challenged the Tanakama, bringing Pari Yom Kippurim, calling it Karban Yachid, that the Tanakama holds that it's called a Tzibur, which would mean the same thing has to be learned over here, Mechlal, that the Tanakama holds that what? The Omar, that Yachid, what? He holds that Par Helam Davar Shal Tzibur is a Karban Yachid. No one can subscribe to that. No one subscribes to that. Says Rava, no. The machlokes between the Tanakama and Rav Meir and Rabbi Yaakov is not how to classify korbanos at all. Ella le Tanakama kamahadele, responding in accordance with the sheet of the Tanakama. The Tanakama himself also was moide. Let's go back to Rav Meir. The Shamei de Ka'amar Karban Tzibur Deichashav Esatuma. Right, what the Tanakama is saying that any Karban Tzibur, that's what it sounds like. Right, is Doicha Shabbos and Tuma, and any Karban Yachid is not Doicha not Shabbos and Tuma. So for that tells Rav Meir to the Tanakama, Karban Yachid Klalahu, is it so in all of the cases? No, there are too many exceptions. Don't even make it into a rule. V'haloi, even according to you, the Pari Yom Kippurim and the Chaviti Kohen Gadol and the Pesach, all of them, even me and you, agree that it's a Karban Yachid. The Karban Yachid, now that's the pshat. Then Fakir, then all of the Tanoim hold it's a Karban Yachid. Then Rav Amram has no raya. Yet, v'deichen Shabbos is a Tuma. And similarly, Amalei Rabbi Yaakov to the Tanakama, you're telling me as a rule that every Karban Tzibur is Deicha Shabbos and Tuma? Is that a klal? It's not a klal. It's not only a klal with exceptions, there are too many exceptions. V'haloi, par helam davar shel Tzibur. And si'irei avaris kichavim. And Chagiga, that even you are moida, like me, that all of these three are called Karban Tzibur, yet they're not Deicha, not Shabbos, and not Tuma. Now guys, we're just continuing to learn what Rav Meir and Rabbi Yaakov is saying. Different than the Tanakama. In other words, the question is, why do we have some karbanos that override Shabbos and Tuma and others not? Not Yachid and Tzibur. This is the klal. Both Rav Meir and Rabbi Yaakov tells the Tanakama. Kol shezman kevua. Anytime, that's the bimoy adai. When Hashem says in its time. So then, even if it's a Yachid, like Karban Pesach, Doiches Shabbos ve'esatuma, afilu b'Yachid. However, v'chol she'ein zman kevua, which is great. So like a par helam davar shel tzibur, yes, the Sanhedrin, they have to find atonement. If they don't bring it on Shabbos, they can bring it on Sunday. V'chulei. Ein adoicha lo yesa Shabbos v'lo yesa tuma v'afilu b'tzibur. Bottom line is that you, Rava, it sounds almost based on the fact that according to this pshat, Fakert, everyone holds that the part of Yom Kippur is called a Karban Yachid. It almost sounds like Rava is challenging Rav Amram, and he's still considering the part of Yom Kippur a Karban Yachid, which, by the way, will be a big kasha on Rava. How did the Tanoim prior to him, way prior, right? Rab Chanina, Reish Lakish, Rav Amir, Rabbi Yitzchak, how did they even argue when it's a Chata Shemeisa Be'oleh? So Abai understood that Rava is arguing with Rav Amram, and he holds that the part of Yom Kippur is a Yachid. So Oy Bazoi Eisvei Abaye now challenges Rava. It says in a Braisa, Par V'Soir Shal Yom Kippurim She'avdu. Another sin, they got lost. Now what happens when animals gets lost? V'Hifresh Achedim Tachteim. Again, out of pocket, the Kohen Gadol has to pay for the par Gezun Teheit. Not only did they designate a new bull and a new he-goat, they brought it. Add those words. And now you found the original ones. Says the Braisa, Kulam Yamusu, they have to be left to die. These are the words of Rebbe Yehuda. Now this again is predicated on us classifying these animals as a privately owned animal, and that's the rule. One of the 5 Chatois Sameh, so is exactly this case. However, both the Tana Rabbi Lazar and the Tana Reb Shimon Oimrim, no. Yiruachi Yistoavu, V'yamachru, V'yiplu Demeim Linadava. Why? Listen to these words. She'ein Chatos Tzibur Mesa. And I'll tell you more. That even Rabbi Yehuda, it's not Pshat Rabbi Yehuda considers this a Karban Yachid. It's a Karban Tzibur. Rabbi Yehuda holds that the Halacha L'Moshe Sinai is not limited to Yachid. even goes to tzibur. And Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon say, no, the rules of the halacha l'moshe misina of 5 chatois hamesos is only by a yachid and not by a tzibur. So how would Rabbi understand Pshat and Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Shimon? So Amalei, so Rava, when he heard this Braisa, says, no, you're not learning good, correct Pshat. That when the Braisa spoke about the par, guys, the soid of Yom Kippur, which brings atonement for all the Yidden, L'kula Alma is called a carbon tzibur. We are only debating regarding the par. So even though the Braisa mentioned the par, we're not referring to the par of Yom Kippur, we're referring to the par of Helam Davar. Yom Kippur Kitani. So says Rava, no, the word Yom Kippur only goes on the soir. Kitani had the soir. So Bachlal, this Braisa is not even speaking about the part of Yom Kippur. Don't bring me this Braisa. So now that did not work because Abaye found another Braisa that Rava didn't know. And there it's clearly that we are speaking about the part of Yom Kippur. Par shal Yom Kippurim, clear. Par shal Yom Kippurim. And the shal Yom Kippurim, same case. They got lost. And you brought the new ones. And now you found the old ones. Kulam Yemusu divrei Rabbi Yehuda. However, why? Because she'ein chatos tzibur mesa. And again, the pshat is not that Rabbi Yehuda classifies this as a yachid. Everyone classifies this as a tzibur. The question is, do you apply the halacha l'moshe misinai on a tzibur or only by a yachid? But everyone considers it a tzibur. How can you, Rava, argue with Rav Amram? So it clarifies the Gemara. Listen, Rava accepts the answer of Rav Amram, which is that the part of Yom Kippur is not called a yachid. So don't ask, anyways it became invalidated. It's not invalidated. That it's left to die is only if it belongs to an individual. He was bothered by the fact that Rav Amram actually called it a tzibur when Rava does not consider it a tzibur. He considers the part of Yom Kippur as an animal that belongs to partners, which is also exempted from the halacha l'moshe misinai. It's not going to be left to die, but it's not called a tzibur. Says the Gemara, loy tema, don't understand pshat in Rava, or even in the Braisa. Even though the Braisa that we have has the word she'ein chatas tzibur mesa, what the Braisa really means to say is she'ein chatas hashutafin mesa, which is beautiful. So the concept of the answer of Rav Amram is good. Rav agrees with it. The question we started with today's shiur is responded to. There is room for the machlokes amoyroim. The part is not shel yachid. We don't apply chatas shemesu ba'aleh on an animal that's not shel yachid. But he has a problem with Rav Amram's classification of a tzibur. It's not tzibur, it's shutim. Says the Gemara, what will be the difference? So the Gemara says, I'll tell you what will be the difference. Not the Negeya Yom Kippur, but the Loi Maisu Kahanim Par B'Ha'ira'am. We're going to learn Masechta Soidiyas. What happens if only one tribe, following the Psak Din of the Sanhedrin, the Roiv of one tribe erroneously does something which may not be done, and we have all of the opinions that say that they also have to bring a part, the Sanhedrin has to bring a part Helam Davar. Why is that? Because the Tzibur or the Kahal did something based on their erroneous psak din, lest you think that kohanim are called tzibur. There's something unique about kohanim, which also means leviim, that they are not called kahal. If only roiv of kohanim leviim follow the erroneous psak of the beis din, then we don't activate the para helam davar shel tzibur. Every individual has to bring their own chatos. Now, why would the Kohanim and Leviim be different than all of the other Shvatim? So Rashi says, because we link it to those who were Noichel, who inherited land. And since they did not get land as their private ownership, they're not called Kol. But that's why Rava did not want people to hear the words, part of Yom Kippur, the part of the Kohen Gadol is called Tzibur. If people will hear that, then they will mistakenly apply the rules of Roiv of one Shevet to Kohanim, and that's wrong. That's the only reason why Rava, when he heard his Talmidim quoting Rav Amram, he said, no, don't say it's Tzibur. But not that Rav is holding its yachid. Rav is moidem that the par of Yom Kippur. Now, is that true to everyone? The first brayse that we learned today, Rav Meir doesn't subscribe to that. But since there are Tanoim that hold that the par of the Kohen Gadol is not called yachid, that answers our question. Gavaldik. So now, Toshima, this is going to be another question against Rava, who doesn't classify the part of Yom Kippur as tzibur, that detail. The boy Rabbi Elazar, Daf Nun Amid Beis. Ledivrei ha'omer parsh Yom Kippurim is a korban yachid. Now, who is this divrei ha'omer? Minimally, my friends, it's Rabbi Meir. Maybe it's even everyone, as we learned that Rav Meir and the Tanach agree with this detail. But that's why Rashi says that this goes to Rabbi Meir. Oh, so now we're going to learn the final question of today, and all of this will be a kasha against Rava. That what? Again, the divrei ha'omer part of Yom Kippur is considered a korban yachid because it's out of the pocket of the Kohen Gadol. Now comes a new question. Oisa temura, oyena oisa temura. What is this question? Gavaldik. When we have an animal that's already designated to his purpose, to her purpose, the owner of that animal, if it belongs to an individual, not if it belongs to partners, not if it belongs to the public, are told by God that they should not make a substitution for it. What would be a substitution? That they have another animal placed on its side, and they say that the holiness of this one should be substituted in the new one. Then the Torah says, even though that you should not have done it, that if you made such a declaration, you affected Tumura. Not that the Kedusha of the first one leaves the first one, but V'hayohu utmurasa yeh kodesh. And there are so many details we learned in Masechta Temura. It doesn't always mean that you bring the Temura. Well, if the Temura is from an oila, then it's takabrot, as an oila. If the Temura is from a chatos, then you will leave it to die. One of the 5 chatois hameso is chatos has to be brought for a specific person for a specific sin. You can't just add another chatos. And by the way, if a temura would be effective from the pot of Yom Kippur, don't think you'll do anything with it. There's nothing to do with it because the Kohen Gadol only brings the dam of one part. So we're not even focusing on what happens now. We're just focusing on whether the Temura to begin with was effective or not, or whether if it's not effective, there's no issue b'chlal, which is even better. And that's the question. Now, if the part of Yom Kippur is not viewed as a korban yachid, then there's nothing to inquire. Then Ablaza would have no inquiry. Why not? Because a korban that does not belong to a individual can never be used as the source of a substitution. So again, that's the top line, that ladivrei ha'omer. Clearly that was Rav Meir. That part of Yom Kippur is considered a korban yachid. And by the way, according to the sugya, according to Rav Meir, of course, if the Kohen Gadol passes away, the new Kohen Gadol has to bring a new part. There's nothing to talk about. All right. Now, what are we doing? We're challenging now Rava. Lav michlal. When Rabbi Elazar uses the words ledivrei ha'omer, what does he mean to say? Obviously he's implying that not everyone agrees with this opinion. And what would the others hold? Lav michlal de ikel amanda omer that it's a tzibur. So at least Rav Amram has someone whom we can lean on with this detail that it's a tzibur. So the Gemara says michlal not. No, ledivrei ha'omer is implying loy michlal de ikel amanda omer that it is considered a part that belongs to partners. Clearly, this Kohen Gadol and all the other brothers Kohanim. Okay, so Bekitzer, Rava stands, Rav Amram stands. We at least resolved the Bamba Kasha. How can there even be a Machloikas Amoraim? Everything is good and fine. Now we're going to focus now on this last Boye Gufa. We learned above Boye Rabbi Elazar Ledivrei Ha'omer Par Yom Kippurim. Right, we're going to minimize. We're going to follow Rava and the concept of Rav Amram. We cannot take this out of the words of Rav Meir, right? Rav Meir clearly holds that a part of Yom Kippur is classified as a korban yachid. So what was the boya? What's now the new question? The final question for today, whether oisa temura or eina oisa temura. Frek the Gemara, I b'chlal don't understand the whole question. My kami boyaleim. Let's guys, lakula alma, it's definitely going to atone for all the kohanim. That's the vidui. If it atones for all of the kohanim, then obviously you can't make temura. Why is that so? So the Gemara gives gavaldika oisias. What do we have over here? We have one person, the Kohen Gadol, who out of his own pocket bought this bull, but it's not being brought only for him. It's clearly being brought for him and his brethren. Now, you have, what we're going to have over here is you have the mekadesh and the mischaper. And you can have this by all the karbanos. Let's say I, God forbid, have to bring a karban chatos. You are allowed to buy the animal for me. You can be magdish the animal for me. Just to make that clear, so you can have one that's the mekadesh, and another or others that are the ones that are going to get atonement from that animal. Now, when we're trying to figure out, this is all a divrei ha'omen that it's a karban yachid, right? He has the boy divrei ha'omen. It's bringing atonement for kohanim. That's not one. That's a group. L'chayra, the only reason why there's room for there to be a boya is because maybe you focus not for whom the pod is bringing atonement, but you are focusing on who consecrated the animal. And taka, only the Kohen Gadol consecrated the animal. But the Gemara is going to prove that we already know elsewhere that we never view the negeya dinei temura. We don't care who is the mekadesh, we only care who is the mischaper. And therefore, even according to Rav Meir that calls it karban yachid, what's the boya? Since dinei temura only follows who is the mischaper, and we know from the words of the vidui sheni that this animal brings kapara for all of the kohanim, avada you can't make temura. What's even the boya? Let's read it inside. Are you telling me that the boya is I basar magdish azlinan or I basar mischaper azlinan? Don't, and that would have explained the boya, but that's wrong. We know that we don't look at the one that's magdish. Pshita, says the Gemara, it's already established. The basar mischaper azlinan. We follow the status of the recipient of the atonement in the case of Parshal Yom Kippurim, even if you're going to call it karban yachid. But as far as temura is concerned, it's certainly belonging to partners, minimally. Now, how do we already know that? And it's not only that, but the Rabbi Lazar, this is the Amoira, right? He would have to know already that which was said by whom? By Rabbi Yechanan, because the Amar Rabbi Yechanan, and he's going to speak about three dinim, how they're not always consistent, and this is a great contrast. So first of all, like this, anytime you are magdish an animal, I'm magdish an animal, if that animal is going to be redeemed, for example, the classical example, it got blemished. Now, this animal has to be redeemed, but there's always a difference between who is redeeming it as far as how much money do they have to pay to Hegdish. If the owner is redeeming the animal, the owner has to add a halachic fifth. If anyone other than the Magdish is redeeming the animal, they have to give the value of the animal to the Beis HaMikdash, but they don't add the fifth. So says Rabbi Yechanan that Hamagdish Moisev Chaimish, even if I was Magdish an animal for you, and the animal gets blemished, if you are going to redeem it, you don't add the fifth. For din pedia, the din of adding a chaimish, we look at the one who consecrated the animal. Statement number 2, which is what's negea to us, that one may not make temura on someone else's animal. So here again, there's a question. If I'm magdish an animal for you, who is viewed as the owner who could affect temura? Don't do temura, but if you did it, it will be effective. So Rabbi Yechanan says only the mischaper, not the magdish. This is all now going to be a problem to why does Rabbi Lazar even have an inquiry. And the third din is he's the one. So there's a rule, my friends. I may never receive money from a kohen directly for me to give him my truma. But if someone other than the recipient, who's a non-kohen, wants to give me a little bit of money for me to give the truma to his friend, and the example that's normally given is that you have a Zayda, and you can have a Yisrael Zayda to the grandson who's a Kohen. Someone's daughter married a Kohen. So the grandfather, this is just an example, who is a Yisrael, is allowed to give me money. I'm allowed to receive a small amount of money. It's called the benefit of the gratitude. The benefit of the Toivas Hana, for me to give money to a specific Kohen. So if someone is paying the giver that little bit, that tip, who does it go to? So again, what's the question? I separated truma from my apples over your apples, from my grain over your grain. If there is some money coming, who gets that money? The one who gave the truma, not the person for whom the truma is given. Gavaldike 3 dinim. Bottom line is, the second statement of Rabbi Yechanan is as when it comes to dinei temura, we look at the mischaper and not on the magdish. The mischaper is a group. So what's the boya? Answers the Gemara, clarifies the Gemara. Lo oilam, guys, we're answering Rabbi Lazar. Lo oilam, pshita yes, Rabbi Lazar heard that din, and he agrees with the great Rabbi Yechanan, and we know that when it comes to dinei tmura, the basar mischaper ozlinan. Yet he has a boya, yet he has a question whether the Kohen Gadol can affect a act of substitution. Why would he have a boya? Since the Torah says that the Kohen Gadol has to be the one buying the animal, even though vidui sheni is for all the other kohanim, listen to Oisias, one might understand that it's not pshat that this animal is being given over to all the other kohanim. Ke'ilu, it belongs to shutvis, and it's being slaughtered and therefore offering atonement for everyone. Maybe, says Rabbi Lazar, that listen to this concept. The moment the Kohen Gadol is atoned, automatically all the other Kohanim are atoned as well. Can you imagine such a concept? In other words, the taka belongs to the Kohen Gadol. Only to the Kohen Gadol. It's his carbon. Especially according to Rav Meir, it's called a carbon yachid. Why do the other Kohanim receive atonement? Because it's as if their atonement depends on the madrega of the Kohen Gadol. The moment the Kohen Gadol gets atonement, and that's done by the par, automatically they get atonement. But it's not brought for them. That is the one side of the inquiry. Do we say it's being brought? The coin, the pod is established for everyone. That's called partnership. And then Rabbi Lazar would not, then ein oiseh temura. Or do we say bekufya? Bekufya means something that's floating. That means that the kohanim have atonement waiting for them, gifted by God. But there's a precondition. In order for the atonement that God gives to the kohanim, for that to take hold on the kohanim, the Kohen Gadol has to have the Kohen Gadol's atonement.
You guys didn't pay for it?
That for sure they didn't pay for it, even if we're not even saying it's being brought for them. He's saying vidin for them because he knows that the moment he gets kapara, they automatically get kapara. Different levels of how to connect to what tzaddik. Other chasidus and not chasidus Chabad, mamish tzaddik b'menasi yichya. That the moment that tzaddik is on the level of a tzaddik, it automatically elevates everyone else. So that's why he has the baya. So now Tashema. Now we're going to try to resolve the inquiry. I know it's getting a little bit late, but it's kedai to start learning. Guys, we're learning a braisa that we will continue tomorrow. So what we're learning now, we'll review tomorrow. But let's go. Chevra, it says in a braisa, choimer bazevach, mi batmura, that there is a greater element of stringency to the zevach proper, to the original consecrated animal, more than the tmura. And on the other hand, benegeya other rules, there is a choimer batmura mi bazevach. Right? That's a typical lashon of Tanoim. There are other stringencies that we find dafke by a tmura, how ironic, even more than the original zevach. And now the Braisa explains. Choimer bazevach, shahazevach noyheg. Guys, we're going to follow the gears on the side. Kit tzibur, kit bayachid, pashit. You have a carbon tzibur, you have a carbon yachid. Like we keep on, like we're learning right now. There's no tumura from a tzibur, doesn't exist. Likewise, a zevach has a something that a tumura doesn't have. That sometimes, at least, a zevach is doicha Shabbos and tuma. Now, whether this braisa is speaking generally or whether this braisa is actually having in mind a specific carbon, that will be the topic in a moment. And number 3, the original zevach can make a temura. And all of these 3 does not exist by a temura. In other words, you can't make a clone from a clone. You can't make a temura from a temura. A temura, even when a temura is brought, it's never going to be brought on Shabbos. Even when a temura is brought, never betuma. Gewaldik. And there's no temura from a tzibur. Clear. The Braisa continues. Now we're going to find, again, this is really an anomaly. We're going to find there are certain stringencies where the tmura has a greater chumrah than a zevach. Chomer b'zevach, which is, number 1, the tmura is chal on an animal that already has a blemish. Now that's huge. When I consecrate an animal with a blemish, before I consecrated it, that animal was never imbued with kedushas haguf. It gets kedushas damim. And therefore it has to be redeemed from Hegdish. But when it's redeemed from Hegdish, it goes out completely l'chulin. The buyer, the Kedusha, goes into the money. The one who purchased this animal can do anything he wants with it. He can share it, he can work with it. But any animal that was imbued with Kedusha Saguf, even if later it became invalidated, and therefore it's redeemed, there is a vestige of kedusha that's in the animal. Guys, we learned this in Kachim. So he says like this: since Tamura is chal on a bamum kavua, even though you have to redeem it, right? Even though you have to redeem it, but since it was chal, it had kedushas haguf. So even after the redemption, it doesn't go out fully lechulin, and therefore ve'enu yoytze lechulin completely for you to be able later to shear it or to do work with it because it had kedushas haguf. Mashe inkein on the zevach. Wow! If when you were magdish it already had a blemish, it never was imbued with kedushas haguf. It only got kedushas damim, and therefore after you redeem it, it goes out lechulin. Now the premise of the proof will be that the Braisa is speaking about a specific case. Hai zevach in the first case of the Braisa, where there's a chomer bazevach over tamura. What zevach are we talking about? If we're talking about a carbon yachid, is a carbon yachid docha Shabbos and tuma? Nah, we must be referring to a carbon sibur. Now, problem is a carbon sibur never makes a tamura. So what will be a case of a carbon that's docha Shabbos, docha tuma, and yet you can make a tamura, my love, that we're speaking specifically about the par of Yom Kippur, and therefore it's doicha Shabbos and Tuma, as we know. But on why we learned the Sanamad Aleph? Because the Kfiyah Leizman, v'oise tamura, wow. Because number one, it's a carbon yachid, and number two, because since it's a carbon yachid mamish, you can make a tamura. So this should resolve the boya of Rabbi Elazar. Great. So Amar Rab Sheshis, no, that the animal that the Braisa is specifically referring to is Be'eloi Shel Aharon. Now, the ayil of Aaron, your mind was asking before, which is brought on Yom Kippur, has no connection to the Kohanim. That's Taka Zevach, Docha Shabbos and Tuma, and this animal, this Zevach, is a carbon. Let me go back over here. V'oise tamura. Because the Kohanim have no connection with this ram. And Achanam mistabra, because the Isal Kadaitach, that this specific case of the Braisa is the par. No. Tamura, the par, Shabbos, V'tuma hu deloy dachya, that would imply that the Tamura of the par, right, cannot be brought on Shabbos, which would l'chura mean, but b'choil mikriv karva, that can be. Because the Tamura of a chatas, even when it's effective, is not brought at all. Ha-Tamura chatas, even Tamura chatas l'misla azla. So therefore we must be speaking about the ayil, and yes, the Tamura of an ayil is going to be brought. Guys, we're going to continue, God willing, tomorrow. All of this is going to see whether we can resolve the boya of Rabbi Elazar from the Braisa, or this Braisa will not resolve, and therefore we're going to continue to look to resolve this question, lid divrei ha'omer, that the pot is called a carbon yachid, oisa tamura, or eina oisa tamura, to be continued.